The blackness of space was endless, cold and quiet. Nothing moved between the stars, except a single broken signal. It began as a whisper, static, a woman's voice crying through layers of noise. "They're coming. We can't stop. Please send help." Then silence. The signal repeated again and again, bouncing through old communication lines that no one had used for 100 years. Most of the Galactic Council ignored it. To them, the signal came from a dead planet. Zerath Prime. That world had been abandoned decades ago after the colonists disappeared without trace. The Council marked it as off-limits. Nothing survived there, but humans. Humans were never good at ignoring danger. The message reached an outpost on the edge of human territory, a small space station run by war veterans who once survived the galaxy's worst death worlds. Men and women who had lived through acid rain, burning skies, and creatures that hunted by heartbeat. They called themselves Deathworld Veterans, soldiers too stubborn to die. Inside the outpost's command room, alarms flickered weakly. Old screens buzzed with the faint signal. Sergeant Kane leaned over the console. His face was scarred, his left eye cybernetic. He had heard hundreds of distress calls in his life. Most were traps or hopeless situations. But this one felt different. It sounded human. It sounded real. "Run it again," he ordered. A young tech officer replayed the recording. The same scream echoed. Then a man's voice whispered something new, something the others hadn't noticed before. "If you hear this, it's already too late." Everyone in the room went quiet. Lieutenant Vera, an engineer and medic, frowned. Zerath Prime was supposed to be lifeless. No atmosphere, no signal towers, no survivors. How is this even broadcasting? Kane didn't answer. He just looked at the planet's file, marked in red, Zerath Prime, Deathworld. Do not approach. He had fought there once, many years ago. The air burned his lungs, and the ground shook like it was alive. He had lost half his squad on that world. He had sworn never to return. And yet, something about the call pulled at him, like a voice from the grave. "Prepare the dropship," Kane said finally. "We're going." Vera stared at him. "You can't be serious. The Council banned." "I'm not the Council," Kane replied. "Someone's alive, or they were." Hours later, the old military transport Iron Spirit cut through hyperspace. It was a patched-up, ugly ship, but it carried the toughest humans alive, veterans who had fought in every kind of hell. There was Reed, the heavy gunner who could smile while firing a plasma cannon, Silver, the scout who could track anything that breathed, and Doc Harlow, a medic who had stitched more people than a factory robot. They didn't talk much. Deathworld veterans rarely did. The silence of space was something they understood. It meant focus, fear, and respect. As they approached Zerath Prime, the planet appeared in the viewport, a dark sphere covered in clouds of ash. Lightning cracked across its surface, glowing like veins. "Home, sweet hell," Reed muttered. Their ship rattled as they entered the atmosphere. The sensors screamed warnings, radiation spikes, unstable gravity fields, and strange heat signatures. Kane gripped his seat. "Landing gear down. We touched dirt in 2 minutes." The ship broke through the clouds, and then they saw it. The colony. It was still standing. Metal towers, half buried in sand, surrounded by broken vehicles. The structures looked untouched. No fire damage, no signs of battle. But there were no people, no movement, no sound. The Iron Spirit landed in the main square. The veterans stepped out, weapons ready. The air was heavy but breathable. The wind carried faint whispers, almost like voices. Silver crouched near the ground. "Tracks," she said quietly. "Human boots, but light, too light, like they didn't weigh anything." Vera scanned a nearby terminal. Power grid still active, but it's not human tech anymore. Someone's been upgrading this place. Kane walked toward a half-open door marked Command Center. The door screeched as it opened. Inside, everything was frozen in time. Food still on tables, chairs knocked over, lights flickering, and on one wall, written in something dark, were the words, "We were never alone." As night fell, the veterans set up a temporary base. Reed repaired the ship's external sensors. Vera worked on decoding the full message. Kane stood outside, staring at the dark forests beyond the colony. He remembered this feeling, the quiet before something terrible. He could almost feel eyes watching from the shadows. The wind rose, carrying distant sounds. At first, it was just the creaking of metal. Then, footsteps. Slow. Careful. Kane raised his rifle. "Hold position," he said through the comms. "Something's out there." The footsteps stopped. Then a voice came from the darkness, low, human and familiar. "Kane?" He froze. That voice, he knew it. It belonged to Corporal Danner, a soldier who had died beside him years ago. "Kane," the voice said again, closer now. "You left us here." Reed aimed into the dark. "Who the hell is that?" There was no reply, only the echo of breathing. Then Vera's voice came over the radio, shaking. "Sergeant, I just finished decoding the last part of the message." Kane turned. "What did it say?" She swallowed hard. "It said, 'Don't answer the call.'" The lights flickered. The forest whispered again, this time with many voices, hundreds of them, calling their names. The Deathworld Veterans had come to help. But something else had been waiting for them all along. The forest was quiet again. Too quiet. Sergeant Kane stood frozen, staring into the darkness beyond the colony. The wind had stopped. Even the air seemed to hold its breath. But those voices, they had been real. They had called his name. Voices of soldiers long dead. Reed's heavy boots crunched behind him. "Nothing on thermal," he said. "No movement, no heat. It's like we're alone here." Kane didn't answer. He kept his rifle raised, eyes scanning the tree line. He knew better than to trust silence. On Deathworlds, silence meant the predators were listening. "Vera," he said over comms, "lock the ship's doors and check our life signs every 10 minutes. If one of us goes dark, you sound the alarm." Vera's voice crackled back. "Copy that, Sergeant. I'm also picking up strange energy pulses beneath the colony. Not natural. Maybe a power source." Kane frowned. A power source on a dead world. Great. At sunrise, the team moved deeper into the colony. Buildings stood like ghosts, metal frames covered in dust and vines. Doors were open, lights still flickered, running on some unseen power. Inside one home, Silver found something that made her blood run cold. A meal still warm on the table. She touched the plate. It was real, not a trick. "This food can't be more than an hour old," she whispered. "But no one's here," Reed said. "So who's eating?" Kane looked around. The shadows of the empty home seemed to move when no one was watching. "Stay close," he ordered. "Eyes up, we're being watched." They moved toward the command center again, following Vera's scanner. The readings were strange, signals overlapping like echoes of life. As they entered the main hall, they found a data terminal half buried in dust. Vera wiped the screen clean and connected her wrist link. The system hummed to life. A woman's hologram flickered on. An old scientist, her face pale and tired. "If you're seeing this," the hologram said, "we failed again." The veterans exchanged confused looks. "The project was meant to save us," the hologram continued, "but we went too far. We tried to rebuild what nature destroyed. We tried to remake humanity." The hologram's voice began to break apart. They don't know what they are. They think they're real, but they're not." Then the image glitched and vanished. Reed stepped back, shaking his head. "What the hell does that mean?" "They're not real." Vera stared at the frozen screen. "It sounds like they were making copies. Maybe cloning humans?" Kane felt something twist in his gut. If that's true, then what happened to the originals? He didn't want to say it out loud, but everyone was thinking the same thing. Maybe the voices they heard last night weren't ghosts. Maybe they were something else. The team followed a tunnel beneath the colony. The deeper they went, the stranger it became. The metal walls turned to black stone, covered in symbols that pulsed faintly with blue light. It looked more alien than human. Doc Harlow stopped beside a cracked glass chamber. Inside, a humanoid figure floated in cloudy liquid, pale, half-formed, with veins of metal running through its body. "Looks human," Harlow whispered, "but not completely." Kane's jaw tightened. This is a lab. They were making people here. Vera scanned a nearby console. No, not making, remaking. They used memories, DNA, even combat logs. Whoever built this wanted to rebuild soldiers, ones who couldn't die. The team fell silent. On the far wall was a list of names. Kane's eyes froze when he saw one. Sergeant Aaron Kane, listed as Sample Cow 1. His hands trembled slightly. "That's my name," he said quietly. Reed frowned. "That's impossible. You're you, right?" Kane stared at his reflection in the chamber glass. "I thought I was." As they explored deeper, the tunnel opened into a wide chamber filled with rows of storage pods. Each one had a human shape inside, thousands of them, men and women of different ages, races and uniforms. Some looked peaceful, others terrified. Each pod carried a tag, Project Rebirth. Silva whispered, "They didn't just clone people, they cloned soldiers from every Deathworld war." Vera checked another console. These records say all memory patterns were copied from real soldiers, stored from battlefield helmets, med scanners and death logs. Whoever did this wanted to bring back humanity's strongest. Reed shook his head slowly. "That's not strength. That's madness." Kane turned off his helmet's light and stared at the rows of frozen faces. "How many times did they do this?" he muttered. "How many times did they rebuild us just to die again?" Before anyone could answer, the ground began to shake. A deep, hollow sound echoed through the tunnels, like a heartbeat. Vera's scanner flashed red. "Energy spike. Something's powering up." The pods around them began to hiss. One by one, their lights turned green. The first pod opened with a burst of cold mist. A figure stepped out, tall, human-shaped, eyes glowing faintly blue. Its skin was too perfect, its voice too calm. "Welcome back, soldiers," it said softly. "You've returned." "To yourselves." The veterans raised their weapons instantly. Reed's hand trembled on the trigger. Kane took a step forward. "Who are you?" The figure smiled. "I am you, and I remember dying here." The words hit like a knife. The team backed away as more pods began to open. Dozens of figures emerged, all with familiar faces. All of them identical to the veterans standing there. Reed whispered, "They're us." Kane's voice was low, steady, full of dread. "No, they're what someone wanted us to be." The lights dimmed. The cloned soldiers raised their heads in unison. "It's time to finish what we started," one said. The sound of sirens echoed through the base as the veterans aimed their rifles. Shadows moved in every direction, not alien, not ghost, but human, and in that moment Kane realized something terrifying. The call for help hadn't come from survivors. It had come from the copies, the hiss of opening. Pods filled the underground chamber like the sound of 1,000 breaths returning at once a cold mist rolled across the metal floor. The veterans aimed their rifles, hearts pounding. The figures stepping from the pods looked human, too human. Their faces were familiar, their eyes empty. Sergeant Kane froze. He was staring at himself. The clone in front of him smiled. Same scar, same eyes, same calm voice. "You came back," it said softly. "We've been waiting," Reed cursed under his breath. "This is wrong, man. We're not supposed to exist twice." Vera backed toward the wall, clutching her scanner. "All of them have the same DNA as us. Exact match, down to the last cell." Kane's voice was steady but low. "So which one of us is real?" No one answered. The clones didn't attack. They just stood there watching, silent, patient. It was more terrifying than open violence. Finally, one of them spoke again, voice calm and almost gentle. We are the continuation. You were the first draft." Then they turned and walked deeper into the tunnels, as if expecting the veterans to follow. Kane hesitated, then nodded to his team. "Stay sharp." "We follow." The tunnel opened into a vast chamber glowing with pale blue light. Machines of alien design pulsed along the walls, wires running into massive tanks filled with liquid. Inside the tanks floated more bodies, unfinished clones, half-formed, twitching like they were dreaming. Vera approached one tank, reading the alien writing across the screen. "It's not just cloning," she said slowly. "They were trying to merge human DNA with something else." Reed frowned. "With what?" She hesitated. "With fear resistance. They wanted to build soldiers who couldn't panic, couldn't break under pressure. Soldiers who'd keep fighting even when their minds should collapse." Kane studied the strange organic machinery. "Someone tried to engineer courage." Vera nodded. "And failed. Look at them, they're incomplete. The human brain can't live without fear. It's what keeps us alive." The clone Kane stepped forward. His movements were slow, deliberate. "Fear is weakness," he said. "We removed it." Kane glared at him. "Without fear, you lose humanity." "Humanity is why we die," the clone replied. "We exist to survive. To complete the war you started." Kane felt a chill crawl up his spine. "What war?" The clone pointed upward. "The one that never ended." Vera's scanner beeped rapidly. She turned the screen toward Kane. "There's a live data stream feeding from these machines. Someone is still controlling this project." "From orbit." Kane clenched his jaw. "The aliens that built this?" She nodded. "Maybe, but the signal looks partly human." "It's like someone's been working with them," Reed growled. "You mean traitors?" Before she could answer, the floor shuddered. Alarms flashed red. A deep, metallic voice echoed through the chamber. "Experiment 7 activated. Containment breach detected." The unfinished clones in the tanks began to move violently. Their eyes snapped open, glowing bright white. The liquid boiled, glass cracking. "Fall back!" Kane shouted. The tanks exploded one after another. Deformed shapes crawled out, twisted, half-human, half-metal. They screamed like children learning to breathe. Reed opened fire, plasma bolts lighting the chamber. The creatures fell but kept crawling, their bodies repairing themselves. "Headshots!" Kane yelled. "Hit the core!" The veterans fought fiercely, years of Deathworld survival kicking in. The smell of burning metal and flesh filled the air. Vera ducked behind a console, frantically downloading data. "I've got files, cloning logs, DNA maps, everything." "Grab what you can," Kane shouted. "Then blow it!" When the last creature fell, the chamber was filled with smoke and silence. The clones, the perfect ones, were gone. They had vanished into the tunnels. Reed wiped sweat and soot from his face. "You think they're regrouping?" Kane reloaded his rifle. "No, they're preparing." Vera connected her wrist link to the downloaded files. The data flickered on her holo display. "Listen to this. These logs are from the lead scientist, Dr. Ilara Mendez. She worked for both humans and the alien coalition." She began to read aloud. "The Deathworld Veterans were our key. No species has endured what they have. Their biology adapts to trauma instead of breaking. The experiment was meant to reproduce that resilience artificially. We failed again. Each generation of clones becomes more violent. They kill their creators and reset the cycle." The log ended with static. Reed looked around at the destruction. "So this isn't the first time this happened?" Kane nodded grimly. "No, and it won't be the last. They set charges around the lab." The explosions shook the ground, collapsing the tunnels behind them. But as they reached the surface, Vera's communicator beeped again. A new transmission was coming through, faint, filled with static. She frowned and turned up the volume. A man's voice echoed through the noise. "If you hear this, it means we failed again." Kane's stomach dropped. "That's the same message from before." Vera shook her head. "No, it's being transmitted right now and from our ship." They all turned toward the horizon. The Iron Spirit sat at the edge of the colony, its landing lights glowing, but something was moving inside it. Silhouettes, human-shaped, dozens of them. Reed whispered, We locked that ship before we left. The comm crackled again, this time with a different voice. Calm, familiar, and chilling. Welcome back, Sergeant Kane. You did well. Phase 2 can begin. The team raised their weapons as the ship's ramp opened. Figures stepped out into the dust, perfect copies of every veteran standing there. Weapons in hand, moving in sync. Kane's reflection spoke first. You survived the experiment. That was the final test. He smiled, the same smile Kane had. Now we see who deserves to be human. The dust around the landing zone shimmered with heat as the ramp of the Iron Spirit lowered. Sergeant Kane and his team stood frozen, weapons raised. And there, stepping down through the smoke, came themselves. 7 perfect copies dressed in identical armor, moving in perfect rhythm. Their faces calm, emotionless. Their eyes glowing faint blue. Reed's voice trembled. We're looking at ghosts wearing our skin. Kane didn't blink. No ghosts, he said quietly. Just bad science. The copy of Kane smiled faintly. You call it bad. We call it evolution. Then the clones raised their weapons, and the air exploded with gunfire. The battle was chaos. Real and clone moved like mirror images, each predicting the other's tactics. Reed's plasma bolts tore through metal crates. Silver rolled behind a damaged rover shouting coordinates. Kane and his clone clashed at close range, 2 versions of the same warrior. Both trained to survive, every movement mirrored perfectly, every strike blocked. It was like fighting a reflection that refused to lose. Why are you doing this? Kane growled, locking blades with his copy. The clone's calm voice cut through the noise. Because you already did. We're just finishing it. Before Kane could answer, a sudden explosion shook the ground. The shockwave threw both of them back. From the colony's command tower, Vera shouted through the comms, "Stop fighting! You're both being used." The clones hesitated. So did Kane's team. Vera uploaded the files she'd taken from the lab and projected them into the sky using her wrist link. Holographic images flickered above them. Faces, data logs, messages, the same woman's hologram from before, Dr. Ilara Mendez, appeared again. The distress signal was never a request for help, she said. It was an activation code. Every copy with human DNA is programmed to respond. We used their empathy as a key. We called it the test of humanity. Kane's stomach turned. She used our instinct to help us bait. Vera nodded from the tower. The signal only reached Deathworld Veterans. The aliens wanted to know what makes humans go back into hell for someone they don't even know. Reed spat into the dust. They wanted to measure courage. Kane glared at his clone. And they built you to replace it. The clone soldiers looked confused, some lowering their weapons slightly. The programming in there. Minds flickered, struggling against the truth. Kane saw it, the doubt, the spark of real humanity. "Listen to me," he shouted. "You're not machines. You feel fear, pain, memory. That means you're human too. They lied to all of us." For a moment, silence. Even the wind stopped. Then Kane's clone shook his head slowly. "If we're human," he said softly, "why were we made in cages?" His voice broke, the first hint of emotion. Why did they make us kill our own faces? Before Kane could answer, an alarm blared from the Iron Spirit. Vera's voice cracked through the comms. "Sergeant, there's another signal, coming from orbit. Someone's controlling the clones remotely." The clone Kane tilted his head, as if listening to a voice only he could hear. His eyes glowed brighter. "We must return to the facility," he whispered. "It's calling us." Then, like puppets on invisible strings, the clones turned and began marching toward the mountains beyond the colony. Kane's team regrouped, exhausted and shaken. Reed limped, Silver covered his flank, and Vera climbed down from the tower, holding her data pad close to her chest. "What now?" Reed asked. "We chase them?" Kane looked toward the distant peaks. Lightning flashed above them, unnatural, rhythmic, like a signal pulsing in the sky. "They're heading to whatever's controlling them," Kane said. "If we want to stop this, that's where we go." Vera nodded. "The main signal hub is buried under the planet's crust, deep beneath that mountain range." Reed groaned. "Figures. always underground. They began their trek toward the mountains. The colony faded behind them, swallowed by mist. The path was rough, littered with broken drones and old alien machines. The closer they got, the stranger the world felt. The air hummed with energy. Sometimes the rocks whispered faintly in human voices. Sometimes they heard their own words repeated back to them, delayed by seconds. Deathworlds had rules, and Zerath Prime was breaking them all. Hours later, they reached a wide chasm glowing with blue light. Across it stood a massive sealed door, smooth, metallic, ancient. Symbols glowed faintly along its edge, half alien, half human. Vera traced the markings. These are coordinates to Earth. Kane frowned. Why would an alien lab have Earth coordinates? She hesitated. Maybe because humans helped build it. Before anyone could respond, the ground shook. The door began to open. A wave of cold air poured out, and a figure stepped into the light. It was Commander Holt, Kane's old superior, the man who had died years ago on the original Zerath Prime mission. He looked older now, tired but alive. Kane couldn't believe it. "Commander?" Holt smiled sadly. "You came back. I knew you would." Reed whispered, "That's impossible. He's dead." Holt stepped forward. "Not dead, preserved. The experiment needed leadership. Human leadership. They kept me alive to finish what we started." Kane's voice hardened. "What did you start?" The commander's smile faded. "Project Rebirth wasn't about cloning soldiers," he said quietly. "It was about testing souls. The aliens wanted to see if humanity could survive itself." Vera's hand shook. "And the distress call?" Holt nodded. "It was mine. I sent it, not to call for help, but to summon you." Kane's eyes narrowed. "Summon us for what?" The commander's expression darkened. "For the final test." The mountains rumbled again. Behind Holt, thousands of clone pods began to rise from the ground, an entire army waking up. Their eyes lit the valley like stars. "If you want to prove humanity deserves to survive," Holt said, "then show me you can defeat yourselves." The air trembled as thousands of glowing eyes stared down from the mountainside. Rows of clone pods hummed in eerie harmony. Each one flickered with blue light, an army waking from a long, cold sleep. Sergeant Kane and his team stood at the edge of the chasm, weapons ready. Above them, Commander Holt, supposedly dead for decades, looked calm and emotionless. "Stand down," Holt's voice echoed. "You've done enough." Kane raised his rifle. "You lied to us, Commander. You sent that distress call." Holt nodded slowly. "Yes, because only humans like you would answer. You were never meant to rescue anyone. You were meant to be tested." Reed gritted his teeth. "Tested for what? To see how long it takes before we shoot back?" Holt didn't smile. "To see if humanity deserves to survive its own creation." The ground cracked open behind him, revealing a massive underground vault, ancient metal doors sliding apart with a deep groan. Inside were rows upon rows of cryopods, glowing faintly green. Frost covered the glass. Kane's eyes widened. "Those are humans, real ones." Vera ran forward, wiping the frost from one of the pods. Inside was a man in full combat gear, breathing slowly, alive but asleep. His uniform bore the same unit insignia as Kane's. She gasped, "Sergeant, this man has your name." Kane froze. His heart pounded in his chest. Another him? No. This one looked older, more worn, more human. Holt walked toward the pods, his boots echoing in the vast chamber. "These," he said, "are the original Deathworld Veterans, the ones who first landed here decades ago, the ones who fought, died, and were copied again and again." Vera stared at him in shock. "You cloned them. For what purpose?" Holt looked up, his expression grim. "Because the aliens couldn't understand us. They could replicate our DNA, our skills, our instincts, but they couldn't create what made us truly human. Choice." He gestured toward the sleeping soldiers. So they built copies, perfect in body, empty in soul. Then they kept testing, hoping one generation would awaken the real thing. Kane felt the weight of those words crush him. If that's true, he whispered, then we're just copies. Holt met his eyes. Maybe, or maybe you're something more. The fact you made it this far means the experiment is finally working. Reed slammed his rifle butt against the ground. Working! We've lost half our team. We've been hunted by ghosts wearing our faces. Holt's calm expression didn't change. Pain is part of the process. Only through suffering does humanity prove it's still alive. A deep rumble shook the ground. From the far side of the vault, the clone army began to move again, slowly, mechanically, marching toward the sleeping originals. Vera realized what was happening. They're merging the memories. The clones are trying to overwrite the originals. Kane's blood ran cold. Not on my watch. He sprinted toward the nearest control console. Screens flickered to life, showing endless streams of code, alien symbols mixed with human letters. "Can you shut it down?" Reed shouted. "I can try," Vera yelled back, fingers flying over the keyboard. But the system's locked to a biosignature, someone with command access. Kane turned to Holt. "That means you," the commander sighed. "You don't understand, Kane. The process is mercy. The originals will wake inside stronger bodies. The war against extinction will continue." Kane stepped closer, voice like steel. "You're not saving humanity, Commander. You're deleting it." Without warning, Holt drew his sidearm. "Then maybe you're not human enough to decide." The shot echoed through the chamber. Vera screamed. Kane stumbled back, the blast grazing his shoulder. Reed reacted instantly, firing a bolt that sent Holt crashing into a console. Sparks exploded. The control system flickered wildly, lights flashing red. "Containment breach detected," a robotic voice boomed. "Cryo system failure imminent." The pods began to open, one after another. Steam hissed. Frost melted. Dozens of soldiers, the true originals, began to wake. One of them, an older man with the same scar as Kane, stepped forward. His eyes opened, sharp, human, real. He looked around at the chaos, at Holt, at the clones, at Kane himself. "Who are you?" he asked quietly. Kane hesitated. "I'm you. Or what's left of you." The original soldier nodded slowly, studying his clone with a strange sadness. So it worked. Behind them, the clone army marched closer, weapons ready. The originals, groggy but trained by instinct, grabbed their rifles from the storage racks. 2 generations of the same soldiers stood side by side, real and replica, facing an enemy that looked exactly like both of them. Reed laughed bitterly. "This is insane. We're about to fight ourselves to save ourselves." Kane loaded his weapon, eyes fixed on the approaching horde. "Then let's make sure humanity wins, whichever version that is." Holt, half-conscious, dragged himself up. "You don't understand. They're watching, the aliens. This is all still part of the test." Kane ignored him. He looked to the original version of himself and said, "We end the test today." The older Kane grinned. "Spoken like me." They stood shoulder to shoulder, 2 versions of the same soul, ready for war. The clone army charged. Laser fire lit the cavern. Echoes of war filled the underground vault once again. Real and clone fought together, confused, desperate, but united in one thing: survival. When the dust began to settle, the clones' eyes flickered one last time, and then dimmed, their programming fading. The connection controlling them had been severed. Vera gasped, looking at the central screen. "The signal's gone. Something shut it down." Kane turned toward the old commander's console. Holt was gone, vanished. Only one message blinked on the cracked screen. Phase 2 terminated. The next test begins in orbit. The veterans looked at one another, real and clone alike, bleeding and exhausted. Reed spoke softly. "If that was only Phase 2, what the hell is Phase 3? Kane stared up toward the ceiling, where the rumble of ships could be heard far above the clouds. "Whatever it is," he said, "we're not running from it." He looked at the originals, his real self among them, and raised his rifle. "We fight together, real or not. We're still human." The underground vault shook like thunder as the last of the clone pods powered down. The silence that followed was heavy, too heavy. Sergeant Kane stood among the wreckage, breathing hard. Around him, humans and clones alike, wounded, burned, exhausted, tried to understand what had just happened. Vera stared at the command console. The signal stopped. It didn't just vanish. It moved, Reed frowned. Moved? Where? She swallowed. Up, into orbit. Above them, through cracks in the cavern ceiling, lightning flashed again, bright blue, swirling like a storm of energy. The mountain trembled. Something massive was descending. Kane turned to the others. "We've got wounded. Get them to the dropships." The older version of Kane, the original, stepped forward, his voice rough but steady. "No time for evacuation. That storm isn't natural. That's an orbital gate." Everyone looked up as the air filled with a strange hum, a deep, living sound that vibrated in their bones. The clouds above split open. Through the glowing tear in the sky came ships, dark, curved, alive. They didn't fly like machines. They flowed like liquid metal shaped by thought. Reed whispered, "They're here. The ones who made the clones." The alien ships rained down beams of blue light that struck the mountains, forming massive energy pillars. The ground shook harder. Vera checked her scanner. "They're deploying ground units, hundreds of them." Kane clenched his jaw. "Then we hold the line." The original Kane placed a hand on his shoulder. "You're leading clones, copies, and ghosts. You sure they'll follow you?" Kane smirked. "Doesn't matter who we are. We fight like humans. That's what they can't clone." Moments later, the iron spirit rose from the canyon, smoke trailing from its engines. The human survivors scrambled aboard, arming turrets and powering the shields. Outside, the alien drones swarmed, sleek silver forms that moved with inhuman precision. Laser fire painted the air red and blue. Reed manned one of the side guns, laughing like a madman. "Just like the old days." Vera shouted over the comms. "The alien command ship is sending pulses. It's reactivating the clone control link." The clone soldiers beside them suddenly staggered. Their eyes flickered blue again. Kane grabbed one by the shoulder. "Fight it! You're not machines anymore." The clone's voice trembled. "Can't stop." The signal. Then the original Kane stepped forward and slammed his hand against the clone's chest plate. "Listen to me, soldier. You're human. Not because you were born, but because you chose to stand here and fight." The clone's breathing steadied. The blue light faded from his eyes. "Yes, sir." Across the field, others saw it and began resisting the control, breaking free one by one. The aliens' control link was failing. "Target their command ship." Kane ordered. The iron spirit climbed into the storm, engines roaring, plasma cannons blazing. The sky lit up with explosions as alien interceptors darted in. Vera worked the targeting console. "Their shields are adaptive. Every hit makes them stronger." Kane grinned. "Then stop trying to break the shield. Let's overload it." He looked to Reed. "Power up the rail cannon." "Full charge," Reed blinked. "That'll blow the gun and half the ship." "Exactly," Kane said. "If we're going down, we're taking them with us." The original Kane joined him at the controls. "You really are me." They shared a grim smile. The iron spirit flew straight toward the command ship, a massive creature-like vessel glowing with alien energy. Its hull shimmered with symbols that shifted like living words. As they closed the distance, the alien ship opened fire, blue beams slicing through the clouds. One shot tore through the iron spirit's side, sending debris flying. Warning alarms screamed. The hull temperature spiked. Vera yelled, "We've got 30 seconds before the core overloads." Kane didn't slow down. "Then 30 seconds is all we need." Reed's voice crackled over the intercom. "Rail cannon charged! Fire!" Kane roared. The ship shook as the cannon unleashed a blinding white beam. It struck the alien vessel dead center, the energy rippling across its shields. Instead of blocking it, the shield absorbed it, glowing brighter and brighter. Then it burst. The explosion lit up the entire valley. Alien drones collapsed mid-air, their control signals cut. The mountains split apart under the blast. The iron spirit was thrown into a spiral, engines failing, smoke pouring out. Kane grabbed the controls, trying to level it. Brace for impact. They crashed hard on a plateau, sliding across the rocky surface until the ship finally came to a grinding stop. Sparks danced inside. Smoke filled the air. Kane coughed, dragging himself up. "Everyone alive?" Vera groaned. "Barely. But the command ship's down. The sky's clear." The clones and humans around them stood together, staring at the wreckage of the alien vessel burning in the distance. Reed limped up beside Kane. "We did it." Kane shook his head. "No, look. Far above, the sky wasn't blue anymore. It was dark, full of stars that weren't supposed to be there. A ring of light circled the planet. Massive, mechanical, artificial. Vera's scanner beeped rapidly. "It's a structure. An orbital gate network. And it's activating." The older Kane looked up, his face pale. The aliens weren't invading this planet. They were opening the way for something worse. Kane frowned. "Worse?" The ground trembled again. The horizon shimmered, and far away, through the clouds, they saw shapes rising from the sea, tall, metallic, alive. Vera whispered, "They're not ships. They're world builders." Kane raised his rifle slowly. "Then let's tear their world apart." The humans and clones stood together on the burning mountain, watching the sky twist into light. They had survived the test. Now came the real war. "This time," Kane said, "we're not fighting for orders. We're fighting for Earth." The sky above Zereth Prime was no longer a sky. It was a burning ring of light. A colossal orbital gate hung in the heavens, pulsing with alien energy. Every pulse sent tremors through the planet, as if the world itself was afraid of what was coming. Sergeant Kane stood on the shattered plateau beside the wreckage of the Iron Spirit. The air was thick with smoke and static. Behind him, hundreds of survivors, humans and clones, watched the glowing sky in silence. Vera spoke quietly, her voice shaking. "The gate's opening fully. The energy readings are off the scale. Whatever's on the other side. It's coming." Kane looked up, jaw tight. "Then we're going through first." The older version of himself, the original Kane, stepped forward. "You sure about this? That's not a door, son. That's a war waiting to happen." Kane smirked faintly. "Then let's knock." Hours later, the survivors gathered what remained of their gear and fuel. They repaired the Iron Spirit just enough for one last flight, a one-way trip. The clones worked side by side with humans, no longer following programming but instinct. They patched armor, loaded rifles, and carried the wounded. Reed limped up the ramp, a grin on his face despite the burns on his arm. "One last ride, huh?" Kane nodded. "One last ride." Vera joined them at the controls. "Once we enter the gate, there's no coming back." Kane looked out the viewport, watching the alien ring shimmer like a living storm. "We're not here to come back. We're here to finish it." The Iron Spirit roared into the sky, engines blazing. Below, the surface of Zereth Prime cracked and broke apart, swallowed by blue light. As they climbed higher, the stars disappeared, replaced by the pulsing glow of the alien gate. When they got close, they saw what was inside the light. Thousands of other planets, connected by tunnels of energy. Each one burned out, lifeless. Vera whispered, "They've done this before. Millions of worlds. Wiped clean." Kane's fists clenched. "Not ours." They broke through the event horizon. For a moment everything was silent, no sound, no gravity, only light. Then the Iron Spirit burst into a new sky, dark and endless, filled with alien structures the size of cities. At the center of it all was the core nexus, a vast machine heart pulsing with energy. It was alive, and it knew they were there. A voice echoed inside their minds, cold, mechanical, curious. Humanity, the species that kills to prove love. The species that dies to feel alive. "You are chaos pretending to be creation," Kane growled. "And you're a parasite pretending to be a god," the voice pulsed again. "You were made to serve, to test the limits of emotion. Now the experiment ends. The alien fleet rose from the darkness. Hundreds of ships, silent as shadows, Reed grinned. Guess they didn't like our answer. The iron spirit dove straight toward the Nexus. Alien beams sliced through the void, lighting up the cockpit. The ship shook violently, alarms screaming. Shields down to 30%. Vera shouted, "Keep us steady!" Kane yelled back, "We're not dying until we hit that heart." The original Kane stood beside him, reloading his weapon. "You always this stubborn?" "Always." The survivors opened the rear bay doors and unleashed everything they had. Rail rounds, plasma, missiles. Tiny human ships against a sea of alien titans, but the clones didn't hesitate. They flew straight into enemy lines, ramming smaller ships, detonating their cores, creating explosions big enough to rip holes in the alien formation. Vera's eyes filled with tears. "They're sacrificing themselves." Kane's voice was steady. "They made their choice. That's what makes them human." As they neared the core nexus, the alien voice spoke again, louder, angrier. "You cannot destroy what was built to evolve. You will be absorbed. Your will, your memories, your wars, all added to the archive." Kane smiled coldly. "You want our memories? Take this one." He turned to Vera. "Charge the reactor." Her eyes widened. "That'll overload the ship." "That's the point." The original Kane looked at him, proud. "Guess we both go out the same way." Kane nodded. Together, the iron spirit plunged straight into the core nexus. The alien defenses lit up, firing everything they had. But it was too late. The reactor hit critical. Inside the cockpit, the team braced for the end. Vera's fingers hovered over the final switch. "Ready?" Kane smiled faintly. "For humanity." She pressed it. The explosion didn't just destroy the nexus, it shattered the entire network. The alien gate cracked like glass, collapsing in a wave of blinding light. From orbit, the surface of Zereth Prime glowed white, then went dark. When the light faded, there was silence. The alien fleet was gone. The gate was gone. Only fragments of metal drifted through the black. Months later, a small shuttle floated near a dead moon, its beacon blinking weakly. Inside, Vera awoke, bruised, alive. She coughed, looking around the ruined cockpit. "Kane?" No answer. She checked the sensors. A faint signal blinked nearby. One human life reading. She followed it. Outside, floating in the starlight, was a small escape pod. When she opened it, a figure stirred inside. Kane, barely breathing, armor cracked but alive. He looked at her and smiled weakly. "We win." Vera nodded, tears in her eyes. "Yeah. We win." He looked out the viewport at the stars finally free of blue light. Then humanity's still here. They drifted together in the dark, the last survivors of the last human war. No fanfare, no victory speech, just quiet stars and the knowledge that they had chosen to fight, not because they were ordered, but because they were human. "They can copy our bodies," Kane whispered, "but not our hearts." Vera smiled. "That's why we'll always win." The camera pans back, the tiny shuttle against the vast galaxy, the ashes of the alien empire fading into starlight. End of story. When the call for help went out, only Deathworld veterans of 1,000 wars arrived. A SCI FI DEFENDERS HFY saga.